Welcome back, everybody. Joining us now is the Chief Communications Officer of the Job Creators Network, Elaine Parker. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to ask you about Treasury Secretary's comments. Janet Yellen said that we're not in a recession, we're in a time of transition. And I just think to myself, only if that transition is purgatory and our economy is about to be condemned to the lake of fire, because for a lot of Americans, it certainly feels like things are going downhill.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And the reality is, you know, if I recall correctly, Bill Clinton was dependent on what the definition of the word is. This administration is clearly dependent on what the definition of a recession is. But the reality is, you know, whatever you want to call it, however you want to define it, it doesn't get any easier for that single mom with 2 kids going to fill up her gas tank or buy groceries. And if people feel like they're poor and they feel like we're in a recession, then we are in a recession. And when 85% of Americans are saying that this country is headed in the wrong way, I don't have to wait till Thursday to decide whether or not we're in a recession. We are in a recession.
Yeah, no, you hear it from every person in the real world. Only Washington can be so detached from it. You represent 30 million businesses, small businesses on America's Main Street. There are a lot of polls lately that show that those business leaders are struggling. There's worries about many of them shutting down by the fall if inflation doesn't get down. How bad is the situation on Main Street, and what does small business need to get back on its feet?
Well, look, we do a poll every month. We poll 500 small businesses nationally to find out where they are as far as how they feel. It's an optimism index, and we call it our small business IQ. We are at the lowest point of the small business IQ that we have been in the history of doing this poll. And small businesses are citing month after month after month that inflation is their biggest issue that they're dealing with, followed by labor issues as well as supply chain issues. And what you need to remember is that the small businesses that we're polling, these are small businesses that actually survived the pandemic and didn't close. And so these folks are actually also disproportionately affected by all of these issues, whether it's inflation or supply chain issues or labor issues. They're disproportionately affected. You know, big corporations, they don't feel it as much. They have access to a lot more capital. They have contracts that allow them to be put to the front of the line when it comes to supply chain issues. They're able to attract more talent and pay more at times when small businesses who are working on razor thin margins are not able to compete as well. And so all of those things and all of these policy issues are disproportionately affecting them. And so our small business owners tell us that they're seeing signs of a recession, that they feel like we're in a recession. And remember, that's a leading indicator for small businesses. And what they're seeing first, they're passing on to their customers, or trying to. You know, it's very difficult to pass on increased costs to customers, but they're trying to stay afloat.
Elaine, when I hear people talk about homelessness, I feel like a Democrat would say to that homeless person, just buy a house. That's what the messaging seems like when it comes to EVs. And Pete Buttigieg's message to just buy an EV if you're worried about gas prices. And you guys are so great with messaging at your organization. You guys threw up the billboard with Pete Buttigieg, highlighting the pain at the pump that Americans are feeling. I know that you have gotten a lot of positive feedback from that, haven't you?
Absolutely. And of course, we're having a little bit of fun, but it really is a serious issue. I mean, people really are hurting across the country. And this was, of course, a moment for us to point out his Marie Antoinette moment, you know, let them drive electric cars. And poke a little fun at him. But the reality is people are hurting, and the administration is somehow taking a victory lap over 40 cents a gallon less. Well, if you want to brag about, you know, $4.50, $4.65 a gallon, you knock yourself out. But those are incredibly high prices across the country either way. And what we found is that a lot of Americans are simply not driving as much. And so while the administration wants to claim that releasing 1 million barrels a day is somehow impacting the price of gas on the global stage, the reality is people can't afford to drive as much. About 2/3 of them in a Gallup poll just a few weeks ago, people said that they weren't driving as much. So they're actually making decisions that are impacting supply. And of course, you know, it doesn't take an economist to figure out that if the demand goes down, then the price is going to come down a little bit. So it's not really a function of this administration's policies, and certainly not releasing a million barrels a day out of our strategic reserves. I mean, that's kind of tantamount to trying to scoop out the ocean with a thimble.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And by the way, we gave some of that thimble to China, it turns out, also, but who's watching that, I guess. Elaine, I want to ask about this. We always need to have confidence in the people that make policy decisions. We keep getting examples, particularly from the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, of her husband trading and making very fortuitous trades around the time of important legislations. The most recent one involving a trade around the time of this new CHIPS bill that's in Congress. Are business people, everyday Americans, becoming more and more distrustful of this insider trading aura that's going on in Congress? And is there anything we can do to try to get behind change there?
Well, I mean, look, it's certainly it's a little out of our swim lane because our members are small businesses. They're not publicly traded companies. But, it certainly shows that Democrats are no strangers to hypocrisy. We know that. I mean, we've got Pete Buttigieg with his Marie Antoinette moment that we just talked about. We've got Gavin Newsom, who famously kept his wineries open during the pandemic. And of course, we have Nancy Pelosi, whose husband continues to benefit from the stock market. And she claims she has nothing to do with it and knows nothing about it. Well, I would claim that it's pillow talk at its best. For him to make this purchase just weeks before this company is set to get, a huge incentive from the government of $52 billion. I mean, it's pretty incredible that they can say that with a straight face before the cameras. And now she's dragging her feet on any legislation that the Congress is considering. And remember, this is bipartisan legislation that's being considered, and she's still dragging her feet. It does make people lose trust in the government when, it's kind of rules for thee, but not for me.
Yeah. Elaine, so many businesses shut down during the pandemic, and my fear is that with the rising cost of goods, supply chain crises, that even more businesses are going to shut down. If they just barely made it out of COVID, obviously they were very happy about that, and now they're getting knocked down at the knees again because everything is more expensive for them. They obviously have to pass that cost on to their customer. They're not just being greedy. They have to do that to stay alive. The small businesses within your network, those folks that you talk to every day, is that a major concern for them? They just got through COVID. They just barely made it through by the hair of their chinny chin chin, and now they might have to shut down because of these policies.
Yeah, like I said, we mentioned that our poll that we do every month of small business owners, and a majority of them are saying that they have had to raise prices. A significant majority is saying that they've had to significantly raise prices. And there is a concern amongst some of the small businesses that they may have to close as these costs continue going up. The producer price index came out last week at over 11%, and that's a leading indicator on consumer inflation, which is at 9.1%. So as long as that keeps going up for the PPI keeps going up, I don't think we're going to see that the consumer inflation is going to start to decrease yet. Because as long as our businesses continue to have to pay more for their inputs, they're going to have to try to pass those on as much as they can to consumers.
Yeah. Real quickly, about less than a minute left, Elaine. The Trump tax cuts, some of them are going to expire. That could be another form of inflation on business. How important is it for Congress to get those, make those tax cuts permanent?
It's imperative. I mean, the most important thing I can say to you today is that no one has to do anything, and those tax cuts are going to expire. No executive order, no legislation, and they will expire. And that will hurt our small businesses across the country who have benefited as a result of those tax cuts. I mean, they saw the greatest economy we've seen in a generation as a result of them. And so Congress, regardless, needs to put partisan ideas aside and focus on helping our small business community.
Yeah, from pain at the pump to pain at the paycheck. Fun times in the USA. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Elaine Parker. We look forward to having you back on.